I just wanted to bring you on, of course, to discuss your policy summit, which is coming up. Clearly, I wanted to talk about the festival, and then how the summit is tied into that. I was a participant. I was a volunteer last year in the veterans portion of it, which was fantastic. And I wanted to bring you on the on our podcast as a part of the first show, to discuss what you do, what the summit is about, what the festival is about, and sort of gear the conversation, particularly in the age of COVID and as we come into another presidential election and things of that nature. I know you do amazing work, and so. Yeah, I'll throw it over to you. First, introduce yourself, and then we'll start the conversation.
And to be on, especially for your first show. Well, I'm Caroline Phillips, and I go way back with Andy to when he was a student at Georgetown University.
That's right.
And I worked in one of the departments, and Andy was my intern and the best intern ever. But about 5 years ago, I left my 9-to-5 job, which used to be working in human rights, start an event called the National Cannabis Festival. And this all started happening right when cannabis was legalized in DC for medical use and for adult use. And the reason that I got involved is once I saw legalization happen, pretty soon after I saw a lot of these really expensive conferences come to the city. And a lot of these conferences were only attended by older white people. Now, I don't, particularly like a problem with older white people. I'm sure they're all fine. But when you live in a city like Washington, D.C., which is a very diverse place, it's really strange to walk into an event and not see any diversity. And I didn't see much in the way of diversity in age or ethnicity, and I thought that was strange. At the time, I didn't really know a whole lot about the war on drugs, but I started to learn a lot more, and there seemed to be a connection between the fact that you didn't see any people of color at these conferences learning about the business of legal cannabis, and the fact that you saw a lot of people of color still in jail for cannabis. And it made no sense to me that people could make a lot of money on cannabis right now while other people are still in jail. So I got this idea to start National Cannabis Festival. And it is a big full-day event. We have a music stage where you'll hear big headlining acts. Andy made reference to our Veterans Lounge last year. We invite hundreds of veterans to attend for free, and we have a special place for them to hang out. I don't know if a lot of your listeners know this, but of course, veterans, for a lot of veterans, cannabis is a good alternative to opioids and to other prescription drugs. It's just hard for them to get access to it. But the festival has a big advocacy component where we talk about criminal justice reform and drug policy and making sure that the cannabis industry is diverse. We also have a large educational program where you can go and spend all day learning about just policy or just hemp or just CBD. So there's a lot going on there. But when I started the festival, I started it because I knew that when it comes to cannabis, there's a whole lot more to the story than just the stereotype of people getting high and having fun. There are a lot of people who are in jail. There are a lot of opportunities for serious business in this industry, and I think that, a diverse group of applicants and business owners should be part of that. We started the Policy Summit 3 years ago because we realized that the festival was going great, but we weren't really able to get a lot of more conservative lawmakers to show up to an event like that and speak out on behalf of cannabis legalization for whatever reason. But there are conservative lawmakers who believe in cannabis legalization. So we put on this summit because we realized it was a place where we could probably get, more members of Congress to show up because they feel more comfortable in a conference setting. We also had a chance to really bring out a lot of the think tank people and policy experts in DC to take part. So it's a really interesting gathering of policy experts and sort of inside the Beltway people. And that's because, you can go anywhere else in the country and hear about cannabis legalization from people that work in the cannabis industry. But it's really interesting to hear convincing arguments for cannabis legalization from experts that work on other issues. And so that's what we're doing this Thursday, September 10th. It is a free event. You can register at nationalcannabispolicysummit.com. And yeah, it should be pretty cool. We have a lot of different people talking, looking at everything about cannabis in U.S. territories to cannabis and COVID-19 to ending the war on drugs.
Awesome. Yeah, and I remember last year you did a pretty good job at connecting both liberal and conservative lawmakers and also stakeholders in the conversation. I think the veteran portion was very important for that. I spoke to veterans from around the country while I was there, and their struggles with medication and and pain, and the situation, the psychological pain that they've had post their service in the military.
Right.
I guess the next question is pretty obvious, but I guess I'll let you speak a little bit more about what your stance is on the legalization of marijuana generally.
So something really important is coming up on September, I think, 21st. The House of Representatives is going to vote on the MORE Act, which is the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. So I think a lot of cannabis legalization experts have been waiting for the right piece of legislation to come down the pipeline, because what we don't want to have happen is for cannabis to be legalized and suddenly only the people with the most money and the best connections get their hands in this business.
Right.
This business was built on the backs of black and brown people who have been thrown in jail for it and are still in jail. Like, if you think about the generational loss to a lot of black and brown communities where something as simple as cannabis possession began a cycle of incarceration for a young person, or maybe it's someone's parent that was thrown in jail for weed and then they grew up without a parent, and it's overwhelming how this pretty peaceful plant has been weaponized against communities of color. So, I think that legalization is coming down the pipeline, and I'm really glad that we have things like the MORE Act that are being championed by people like Barbara Lee and really important organizations like the Drug Policy Alliance, NORML, the National Cannabis Industry Association, the Marijuana Policy Project. So these activists who've been working for a really long time to get these laws, they want this particular piece of legislation to pass because it has provisions in it that guarantee equity, or that push for equity. That means that more people of color get access to licenses to participate in the legal business. It also has provisions in there about expunging records. So if you were once arrested for cannabis and it's been hindering your life, you can't vote, you can't get certain jobs, we're going to try and clean that up a bit, because that's not fair. So I want to see cannabis legal, but I don't want to see it pushed to be legal so fast that we see people get left behind and see certain people still suffering in the way that, pretty much the white people aren't. So
Right.
I hope that when cannabis is legalized, it's done with an ear on criminal justice reform and on racial equity.
Right, and that's very important for individuals that have faced the brunt of the legal aspects of it. What is your how has your organization? I know this year was going to be the 5th annual festival, which happens at the RFK Stadium, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing time I had there, as I mentioned. How have you been able to? I'm assuming you had to postpone or cancel the event this year because of COVID. How have you guys adapted to that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's really disappointing. From having worked with us a little bit last year, the festival is a full year planning process. There's not a single month of the year that we're not working on something. So the festival happens in April. In May, we're paying bills, settling accounts. by July, we're working on the program for the following year, and we're doing the fundraising and getting everything together. So it's really hard in month 11 to have to pull the plug.
Right.
Then to have to pull the plug without knowing when it makes sense and when it's safe to be able to get a couple of thousand people together in a field. So like I understand why this has all happened. It's really been disappointing. I'm a small business owner. We're only in year 5. Our small business employed 7 other people. And we're working really hard on an issue that is just now starting to get the attention it deserves. But yeah, so I can't say that this hasn't been really hard. We have our fingers crossed for next year. I would love to be able to see public health and science get the respect that it deserves so that we can get people well and get rid of this virus so that we can get back to living our life.
Indeed.
So hopefully that happens.
Now, we spoke about the MORE Act at the federal level. But as you very well know, this is we do have a federal government system, and so usually things sometimes, at least big changes that have happened in the past, usually happen in a 2-pronged way where they attack the federal level, but then they also go state by state. Is there what work is the National Cannabis Festival doing on a state level and even at a local level to ensure that we do have some reforms to the system and on how we treat individuals that have that use marijuana, whether for recreational or medicinal purposes?
So that's a good question. Of course, National Cannabis Festival is in DC, and DC is not a state, so we're still under the thumb of Congress. But we work in the local community. We'll speak at DC Council hearings. And what we're trying to do is work with local community members and with folks in the nonprofit groups that are working here locally on making sure that the voice of the local community is heard at the city leadership level. I know that the city of DC is right now looking at full recreational cannabis sales and considering if they can make that happen. So there's a lot of talk right now about micro licenses and making sure that the opportunity to sell legal cannabis is not just owned by 7 people, but that there are different ways for people in different communities to get involved. Because if this is a medicine, you can get certain medicines from 7-Eleven. You can get certain medicines at CVS. You can get certain medicines at the grocery store, at the corner store even, your Tylenol or this or that. So I think for this to be an equitable industry, we'll need to be seeing variation in licenses. And that's something that we really would love to see in Washington, D.C. So whenever we have a chance to speak to anybody at a level of influence, we talk about that. And then just up and down the East Coast, we work with a group of 30 nonprofit groups, including the Cannabis Cultural Association. Those guys. They're based in New York City, Nelson and Jake. And they, it's an organization specifically for educating people of color around cannabis legalization. We also work with groups like the ACLU. So, the National Cannabis Festival is trying to work at really every level of this fight. But I think what we're really here to do is provide a platform for all of these groups to really get their voices out there. Now, right now, I think a lot of people show up to the festival to have fun, but they also leave having learned something.
Oh, no, for sure. I learned a lot. Now, my follow-up question to that is, I know in New York, I looked into the state legislation that has been proposed. I think the governor's been a little bit resistant on it. So sort of a 2-pronged follow-up question is, one is, how do you think COVID and the financial hole that it's left in local and state governments, how do you think that plays into the push for the legalization of marijuana? And the second part of that is, what are your thoughts on New York? I believe the way they drew up the legislation is that if you are a grower of marijuana, you also won't be able to have a retail license. And I guess that's sort of what you're talking about in terms of splitting up the licenses so that there is some distribution of the industry, right? So that if
Right.
If you're a
So
large,
that's really interesting to hear. That's actually how it is right now in DC. You can't hold a cultivation license and a dispensary license. You can hold one or the other.
right.
So that's pretty interesting. I am not extremely familiar with the language in the legislation being proposed in New York City.
Not
But
in
I
this.
am
It's a
glad
it's
to
a
see
state.
it
It's a
moving.
state law. I'll send it to you. It's pretty. It's pretty. I think it was well designed. I don't know why for some reason it hasn't passed. I'm sure it's a lot of politics, but I would read
It's
it
gotten
just to
so
get
close for
ideas.
so long. Like, I feel like that's something we've heard about for years.
Yes.
Like, this is the year for New York, and then for some reason it just always pulls back at the last minute.
Yep. And so
Interesting
the other part of it is the other part of the question was, do you think that COVID, the financial hole that it's leaving, do you believe that that would sort of put in a push to states like New York to get this moving?
I think that it's really appealing to a lot of states right now to look at cannabis and the potential tax revenue from cannabis to fill in some of the gaps and damage from COVID. And I think that COVID has also given us a chance to really consider cannabis in a different way. It is a medicine. And a lot of cannabis dispensaries have been treated as essential businesses. So I think that's also been an important step for the industry. But yes, I do think that we're going to see definitely at the state level, governors trying to find ways to use cannabis tax revenue to help fill in the gaps. And if that's something that the cannabis industry can be seen to do, then maybe that's a good thing. Like,
For
that
sure.
helps us get where we need to go faster.
For sure. Without leaving, I don't, as you mentioned, you don't want to see a rush to it, and forget about, the leaving out the black and brown business owners and also disregarding everyone who's been already locked up or legally affected by marijuana in the past. So, I would, as we do, probably we'll rush into legalizing it. I think those two other factors are very important here in New York, particularly. And then I'll end our conversation. I think we started talking about it a little bit, but if you can talk a little bit more about your summit that's coming up on the 10th. It's the National Cannabis Policy Summit, and I believe the website was the nationalcannabispolicysummit.com, which I'll post up on my Facebook.
Yes.
So
that is a fun event. It's totally free. If you sign up and register online, you will be sent a program book that includes a lot of resources, information about the speakers, videos and articles that you can watch that will help contextualize a lot of the conversations that we'll be having. But it's a 4-hour program from 12 to 4 on Thursday, September the 10th. Tune in whenever you feel like it. Like I said, it's free to watch, so you don't have to worry about tuning in for 10 minutes and then coming back later on. But we're going to be looking at cannabis policy as it relates to election issues. So, we have the Cannabis and Immigration panel, where we have a lot of experts that say if we legalize cannabis in the United States, not only would it decrease drug and human trafficking, but it would also allow Border Patrol to concentrate their time on other things, like violent crime or things like that. We have a we have a panel that will be looking specifically at public opinion in cannabis. So we're going to be going through the major election issues as they relate to drug policy in the United States. We have a couple of members of Congress joining us, and then a lot of experts from drug policy think tanks and political experts from sort of across the political spectrum. So you'll see people from the right and the left who may not all agree for the same exact reason, but all agree that cannabis should be legal in America. And, it's kind of a funny thing because we're living in such divisive times, but you've got to almost wonder why one of these presidential candidates doesn't just come out and say, I'm going to legalize cannabis, because with 70% of public support, you figure that's almost like a shoo-in. Why not do it?
Never say never. It's not too late yet.
October surprise, right?
Well, I want to thank you, Carolyn, again for joining me. Hopefully we can do this again after the summit in a more technically advanced version as I improve my podcasting situation here. But I do want to thank you for your patience and also your time. I will be on the 10th. I would look forward to the policy summit to get that information and share it with my viewers and followers. And I recommend it all to my friends as well to go on and watch and learn fun things, but also educational things. So I appreciate that, Carolyn.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we can do this again as we head towards the next in-person festival, and hopefully you'll be able to come and join for that.
Amen. Have a good one.
Well, thank you, Andy. This was really fun.
Likewise, thank you.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
All right, bye.
Bye.